All right, good evening. This is for Wednesday's class session, session 4. And our focus and goal of this session is to look at chapters 4 and 7, Special Education Law and No Child Left Behind, IDEA and ESEA. I am breaking this apart into multiple sessions because there's just too much information for me to pack in. I'll tell you right now, the majority of the information is on chapter 4, and I'm going to do about half of it in this video, and then I'm going to start another video. There'll be a second video for part 2 to finish up the special education law and to look at No Child Left Behind. All right, so also just a little bit of housekeeping reminder, and I'll put an announcement on Canvas as well. Wednesday, the day of this class session, is your due date for your first abstract, and I will be in the office around the time and online around the time that it is due, so I'll work to try to get those graded as quickly as possible and back to you. All right, so without further ado, let's jump in. So in chapter 4, and again, we may need to be doing this in a couple of different sections. We're going to talk about the development of the special education law, the purpose and structure, reauthorization and amendments, and then funding and enforcement. So, the development of the law. In the 1970s, the federal courts were starting to address and speak on issues of educating children with disabilities. We heard about some of that from Section 504 and the development of the Civil Rights Law. And they were applying some of those same tenets that we saw in the civil rights movement in terms of exclusion of students in school. This time, students with disabilities. And so after a couple of attempts, finally in 1975, President Ford was able to sign the Education of All Handicapped Children Act, and special education law was created. And the way the law works is that it is a funding law. So unlike Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which was a civil rights law, and worked to eliminate discrimination, IDEA works to provide a funding stream to states, and if they agree to receive that funding stream, then they have to agree to all the terms and elements of the law. So again, similar to the way in which we see national transportation dollars work, if Ohio wants to receive federal highway dollars, they have to agree to have their speed limits be 70. So they agree to all the rules, and the speed limit's the one that we all know about. So this was the same kind of thing. If you want the money, you have to agree to all the components. And we saw a case right after the law was passed, which New Mexico did not put forward a plan and was not going to adhere to the law. And they were compelled to adhere to the law by the courts. And so they went ahead and followed the plan to receive the money as well. So purpose and structure, and this is important. All right. So the purpose is to provide a free public education that is tailored to to a student's unique individual needs. So the law recognized that students with special needs, there were a lot of various ranges of disabilities, and that the range of disabilities was going to be unique and needed to be individually tailored to those students. But that individualization and that tailoring did not give schools an excuse to not educate those children. So one of the things that's important about the special education law is who's protected. And we talked about this with Section 504, and it's different with IDEA. And one of the major differences is that IDEA creates categories of disabilities. So if a child has a disability that fits into one of the categories that are listed, and that list is in the text, and I encourage you to look over that, they then, and that disability, that categorical placement also impacts their ability to receive education. They're placed within the special education law. The law covers children from ages 3 to 21. And that's the part where public schools, local education agencies, public schools are required to provide services. But the special education law goes a little further to have a section that includes infants and toddlers. And the infants and toddlers section is birth to 3 years. So the law provides another funding stream that states can receive to provide some services to infants through toddlers. And in Ohio, that's the Help Me Grow program. So they would provide speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy to infants and toddlers that are identified as in need. So the structure of the law, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this, because this is really an important piece for you to understand, and really a major component of the chapter itself. So Part A, the law itself is broken into 4 parts. Parts A, B, C, and D. Part A is really the justification and background. So a lot of the things that were written in the 1970s that justified why there was a need for there to be a special education law in America are still embodied in Part A of IDEA. They identify the kinds of treatments that students with special needs had received that compelled the federal government to engage in the creation of this law. This section also includes all the definitions. So there's a federal definition for autism under the special education law, and it's included in that Part A. Or the definition of other health impairment, qualified teacher, all of those kinds of definitions would be listed in Part A. Part B is really the meat of the law. It is the 8 key principles that are embodied in this section. And one of the things that I would say, I think it's important to note that the U.S. Department of Education does not see Part B as 8 distinct principles that need to be included or addressed, but as a single whole that is all part of IDEA. But for our purposes and for academic purposes in general, it's helpful to break it into some smaller parts so we can look at those various connected pieces. So that's what we're doing here, and we're going to go around this slot and look at all 8 of these characteristics. So the first key principle is zero reject. Simply means exactly what it sounds like. You cannot turn away any student. No matter how severe their disability is, the public school has a responsibility to engage and work to provide education for that child. Identification and evaluation. The key here is that it builds the process for identification of who should be included, and or the identification for who will receive services. And a key element of this is that there's an inclusion of and consent of parents in this process. So a school can't simply go in and start testing a kid and then call the parents up and say, hey, we tested your kid and they're eligible for special education services. The parents have to be a part of that conversation about whether this child should be tested for special education services. And then once they have been, if they agree to testing, then they have to be part of the conversation as to decide whether they are eligible for special education services. So this is a key element in the identification evaluation. So we talked about FAPE with Section 504. There's FAPE for IDEA as well, free, appropriate public education. And it comes in 2 parts. There's procedural protection, which is, again, really equates out to parental participation. They have to be a part of helping decide what an appropriate public education for their child would look like. But there's also substantive protections. It has to be free. It is at the public expense. That education has to align with the state guidelines and standards. The education has to include preschool, elementary school, and secondary school. It has to conform to the individualization of the student's individual education plan, the IEP. So if you don't do all of those things, you're not providing FAPE. Then most of the time where we see FAPE schools butt up against FAPE is sometimes we see them butt up against around the free part, the appropriateness. Then we see either the way they have aligned or disaligned with the state standards, or how they're conforming to the IEP. And that's where we see a lot of contention around the notion of FAPE. Another one of the key principles is this notion of least restrictive environment. An identified student must be educated with their non-disabled peers to the maximum extent possible. It's just that simple. There's no more holding students with special needs off in the corner and then deciding to let them out every so often. This is all about keeping them in the general population as a part of the school as much as possible. And it's important to note that students with severe disabilities, still there's an expectation within least restrictive environment that they still have opportunities to interact with their non-disabled peers. Procedural safeguards. There's 4 key components to procedural safeguards. Some general safeguards: announcement of meetings, presentation of procedural safeguards, consent signings, agreements, all of those kinds of things. Parents have the right to receive an independent evaluation if they disagree at the school's expense. A student has the right to have a surrogate parent assigned to them if their parents are not present. That surrogate parent cannot have connection to the school, and there's a whole process for dispute resolution, mediation, as well as a full due process piece. All right, technology. The school is to seek out and provide appropriate assistive technologies to ensure FAPE. We need to use all tools possible to help make sure that we help students and help them achieve their goals of their IEP. States are required to develop a plan to make sure there's plenty of qualified special ed educators in their state. And again, a key principle, and I've mentioned it a couple of times already, but that there is parental involvement through the entire process. So that's part B. Part C is the infant and toddler space. The whole idea is that if we can identify children with developmental delays, that maybe we can resolve those delays before they actually get to school. And part D is about the support and development of for development of programming and research. So I'm going to stop right now, and then I'm going to start another video that's going to deal with reauthorization and amendments, and finish up this section on ADA and a few brief slides on the ESEA. All right, we'll see you when you click on the next one.